Thank you so much. Welcome to the Policy and Pandemic Panel in South Asia. I'm Yazad Jal from the Center for Civil Society, and we've got four fantastic panelists from all around South Asia. We have Ali Salman from Pakistan, Basanta Adhikari from Nepal, Dhananath Fernando from Sri Lanka, and Parth Shah from India. I'm going to start by letting the panelists introduce themselves and also give a short overview of the situation of COVID-19 in their country. Let's start with Pakistan. Ali Salman on Pakistan's policy in pandemic. Over to you. Ali, you're muted. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Yazad. Thank you, SFL, for organizing this important virtual conference and a discussion on South Asia. And I think, given the trends, how the COVID-19 has taken over the world, if we were initially seeing the trends that the numbers in South Asia were not that rising as compared with some European countries, but now they seem to be rising as much. So what I will do is that I will provide a very quick overview of the situation from Pakistan, and then later we can talk about what is happening in terms of the government policy actions and the challenges which different policy actors and stakeholders are facing there. So this is the latest situation, which was updated 19th of April. So today, taken from PIDE, Pakistan Institute of Development Economics dashboard, which has been doing very actively in terms of data monitoring of the pandemic in Pakistan. The blue line here, which you can all see, is, as you can see, the steep rise. It is the total number of confirmed cases. The green line is the total recovered cases, and the pink, or the reddish pink line is the total number of deaths. So you can see that what is obvious is that Pakistan is yet to achieve the peak, and the number is rising on a rising trend. If you want to see the actual numbers, so the total cases which have been confirmed is 7,638 out of the tests which is conducted. 92,000 tests have been conducted so far. 5,663 are active cases, which is 74% of the total cases. 143 deaths so far, and 1,832 patients recovered. I think that the distribution within Pakistan is following the distribution pattern in the population in terms of different provinces, and the initial reaction from the government, which we see in last month or so, was kind of, I think both the federal governments and the provincial governments, because Pakistan, like India, is a federation, so the provincial governments and the state governments had a lot of power. So we saw that actually on the question of the lockdown, Pakistan is under partial lockdown right now for about 3 weeks. But the provinces and the federal government were not on the same page. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, had been saying, quite rightly so, that moving to a total lockdown would not be an option for Pakistan because of the informal workers, laborers who are dependent on daily work would go out of the job, and that will be serious economic crisis. But gradually, I think provinces went for at least a partial lockdown. But very soon we also saw that the government has been active in restoring some of the sectors. So we recently saw construction sector being opened up, and construction, as you would know, that is as a link with all other sectors, for 40 other sectors. So we saw that some of the economic activity is getting back. There's a lot of burden on the hospitals, and unsurprisingly so, Pakistan is facing shortages of the testing kits, ventilators, and other necessary equipment right now. Just to give you a perspective on the situation in the healthcare in Pakistan, this is another graph. So what you see here it will show you the sort of the stress on the healthcare system across the country. Number of patients per bed, in some cases 6,000 patients per bed, in some cases 2,000 patients per bed, and number of patients per ventilator is 260,000. Although Pakistan has not gone to that extreme, but if the situation gets worse, then it is certainly facing a shortage of ventilators. There have been various attempts to sort of analyze that if Pakistan were to go to full lockdown, then what could be the economic implications or effects of complete lockdown. For instance, this is the worst case scenario. If the trade disruption happens through loss of GDP, there will be a direct impact of minus 4.6% on GDP. 18.53 million people might get unemployed. Wage losses, 125 million people may go under the poverty line. And also there will be effect on the internal migrant workers in Pakistan, as well as SMEs in unemployment, which is expected to like 3.3 million in SMEs are going to experience this, the job losses. So I think this is the overall scenario right now, from health to the economic aspect of this crisis. But looking forward to further discussion on Pakistan and other countries. This is all from me now as initial comments.
Thank you so much, Ali. Basanta, would you like to go next?
Yes, sure. Okay. So thank you very much, Azad. Thanks to Student for Liberty for giving me this opportunity. So if I have to talk about Nepal, so if I have to give my introduction, so my name is Basanta Adhikari. So I'm from Biratnagar, Nepal. So I run Vikalpa and Alternative, which is a public policy think tank, which is based in Biratnagar, eastern part of Nepal, quite close to India border. So we work for individual and we work to promote the values of individual and economic freedom. So we started this organization in 2014. So talking about the present situation of Nepal, so far we have got 31 cases. So we have identified 31 cases so far, and 3 of them have recovered, and there is no death so far. The first case we received is in January 24th. So it was the case, the student coming from Wuhan, China. So that was the first case reported at that time. And then so far, what we are doing is that the government is doing rapid testing, and so far in all the districts we have this testing kits, and 27,471 people have been already tested. In terms of per million people, it's 943. I say it's a below number, so it's a not so good number. Still, there are many people to be tested, and we don't know how many people are going to be affected and how many people are affected by this one. And we have 29,730 quarantine beds. Everything is shut down. So we since last 27 days, the country is totally shut down. I say that you can go to buy the medical stuffs or some food stuffs in the market. Otherwise, everything is closed. I say that the medicine shop and then some departmental stores it's open. Otherwise, the small shops and every vehicle is closed down. So that's why we cannot move. And because of that reason, many people are facing a problem. And this is the country where 21% of the people are below the poverty line, and then 60% of the people are working in the informal sector, or people who work on the daily basis. So it's very difficult to keep these people in the isolation. I say that, or people. So we talk about the social distancing. It's very difficult to keep the poor people in the social distancing, because the first thing is that our literacy rate is also not so good. I say that it's around 70% or not even 70%. So there are many people who are not literate, and they don't know what is the meaning of self-isolation. So people cannot read, and so many people are ignorant about this one. So government have to put force. So we have seen so many situations that where people are showing their brutality to these people. So this is the situation. And then mostly these low earners, I say that daily wage earner people, they are being affected by this situation. So Nepal is getting 29% of remittance. The GDP is covered by the remittance money. I say that 5 million people are working outside of the country right now. So now the problem is that those people, they are also, all other countries are, all the entire world is getting affected by this crisis. And then the problem is when those people will, they have to come back. They will come back someday. And then how are we going to handle that is going to be a biggest challenge. And we were receiving 29% of our GDP from that remittance money. And now when those people will not be able to send the money, on how the economy is going to sustain, that is a bigger challenge. The other is, around 8% of our GDP is covered by the tourism. So many people, tourists used to come to Nepal, but now the challenge is around 1 million people are, in this sector. So now everything is shut down. And because of that reason, even this economy is going to open up. So the tourism is not going to flourish, suddenly, because it will take time. People need to have money. They need to have a time to come. So that's why it's going to hit longer, in a longer run. It's going to hit for a longer run. And the other problem is that we used to, it's a poor country because of that reason. So many people, so there are many people, there are many NGOs and INGOs working in the development sector. So many people are engaged in this job. So now the challenge is that as it is hitting everyone. So in the past, we were receiving some kind of support from outside, just like from developed countries. So when we were facing the crisis like earthquake and the economic blockade, at that time people were sending the remittance money, or we were getting some kind of aid. But now the challenge is everywhere. So that's why it's difficult to get those kind of support. And then we have to cancel our tourism year. We were supposed to bring 2 million tourists this year. And then we have to cancel this program. So it's hitting badly in the manufacturing sector, also in the trade sector. So 14% of our GDP is covered by the trading and manufacturing sector. 20% of the revenue, government get the revenue from the taxation. And so it's hitting badly to every sector. So I say that mostly it is hitting to the poor people. So people who have got something to eat, they can manage to survive in the isolation, or they can keep the social distancing. But what about the poor people? So it's going to hurt to the poor people. So this is what I have to say right now. So I will be talking more in the coming discussion.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Basanta. Dhananath, what is the situation like in Sri Lanka? And introduce yourself as well.
Hi guys, is my audio clear, Azhar?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Dhananath. I'm joining from Sri Lanka. I represent an organization by the name of Advocata Institute, which is a public policy think tank, more working on the economics front, and indeed honored to be in the panel. Prath is one of our advisors, so it's indeed to be honored to join this panel. Just to give you a brief background on Sri Lanka, we are a 21 million population country. So for today, it's about 256 confirmed cases so far, starting from January. In terms of number of deaths, 7 deaths has been reported till today. And in terms of testing capacity, it's approximately about 440 to 450 per million testing capacity is what has been conducted. So that's the broader, the main matrices. However, it has been commended in terms of like the social situation. Since about a month ago, we are in a complete lockdown. It's curfew here. And yesterday, government announced that the curfew will be lifted phase-wise. So 3 districts, which is the capital Colombo, and the 2 adjacent districts, Gampaha and Kalutara, and few other districts have been mentioned as the red zones. So they will be opened on next Wednesday, that is 22nd, and the other districts will be open from tomorrow, from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the evening, and then the curfew will be imposed again at 8 o'clock in the evening. And the government has issued a guideline on opening up. So only 1/3 of the workforce can be reported, and the organizational head has to make a call on who is going to report to work. And there's a series of guidelines on social distancing has been provided. So Sri Lanka is in the phase of opening up actually from this week onwards. In terms of economic impact, yes, it's a big whammy on our economy on multiple fronts. Our main in terms of income, it is basically the merchandising exports, it's apparels, it's rubber, it's tea. It depends pretty much on remittances as Nepal. So all the economic engines have been badly affected. Tourism. So tourism is on complete standstill. And the apparel sector, some of the factories are working, but I would say it's just like 5% of our entire capacity, and they are facing losing orders from Europe because the situation in US, and most of our exports are to US and to Europe and the European Union. So so it's not a in terms of economy, it's bad. It's a bad impact definitely. But the positive side is we are opening up from tomorrow phase wise, and then we have to see how things are moving forward. That's the main the initial update, Azhar.
Thank you so much, Anant. Let me move on to Parth, who will give us an introduction as well as an overview of what's happening in India. You're on mute, Parth.
Yes. There's something to remember. Thank you, Yazad, and I'm glad to be part of this two-day virtual conference on policy in pandemic. I think it's a great collaboration between Center for Civil Society and this Students for Liberty South Asia. I'm sitting in Delhi. I'm speaking to you from there. I'm also founder of Center for Civil Society and the co-founder of Indian School of Public Policy. I think India, of course, is going through quite a difficult time. I think like most other countries in the neighborhood. The current numbers in terms of the cases and deaths, the numbers are about 13,000 cases have been identified, 2,300 have recovered out of that, and we are just approaching about 500 deaths so far. In terms of course, India is a very diverse country, so not all states are in a similar situation. There are several states which have no cases at all. Kerala was one of the first states to be affected in the country, largely because of the large expat population that works abroad, and there's much more international travel between Kerala and the Middle East and other countries. Kerala actually has done quite well to recover from the initial shock. They seem to be tapering out and have become, in some sense, one of the models for other Indian states to follow. One of the worst performer obviously is Delhi. Second one is Maharashtra. Third, I think, is Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh. Right? These are the sort of top 4-5 states which are most adversely impacted by the COVID-19. I think in terms of the overall economic sort of situation and impact, just like I think most other countries, almost 80% of the population in India also depends on informal sector. There are not all daily wage earners, but good number of them are daily wage earners, and majority of them are pretty much living monthly paycheck to paycheck. So that is one of the biggest challenge that India has in terms of the economic impact. I think one of the things that India has done, which I understand that Pakistan has not done, but to some extent there's a lockdown also in Nepal and Sri Lanka. We had a 21-day lockdown that got over, and then we introduced 19 more days of lockdown. So totally we are going to be would have 40-day complete lockdown in the country. There is some discussion that from tomorrow onwards, there'll be some areas and some industries which were allowed to function. It's not yet clear which areas and which industries would begin to function. But obviously they would not be functioning at the full capacity. Most likely be 1/3 of the labor force that will be allowed to participate in those activities. Right. The lockdown has meant there is no transport services, rail, airlines, buses, everything is closed. One of the biggest impact is on the transport and the hospitality industry. Hotels and everything else is closed too. Right. The schools are closed, colleges are closed, and so the students of the Indian School of Public Policy are now at home, and we are running online classes from the homes of the various professors. And so that's I think in terms of the overall situation of the lockdown, we are hoping that lockdown is a good way to sort of send a message out to the public of the seriousness of what we are facing. But obviously it cannot continue for much longer. There have been instances where people, the migrant laborers from some of the cities, have had to leave their cities, and they have been traveling on foot since there is no transport, and situations where people have traveled 200, 300 kilometers and some up to 800 kilometers, almost other end of the country from North India where they started. So there's a huge, I think, pressure on very vast number of Indians in terms of just meeting the daily needs that they have. Let me stop there, and then we'll come back on some other questions.
Thank you so much, Parth. So this is a very good introduction on the status on what's happening in each country. But what we'd like to know is what measures has the government taken to combat the pandemic? And what are your comments on the measures? Dhananath, let's start with you.
Sure. So in terms of the government action, at the beginning, actually, they at the first stage, they closed down the airports and mainly the entry to the country. But however, there is some criticism that they did it slightly late. But however, as soon as the things were indicated, the government completely, in terms of lockdown, they locked down. They moved to like a lockdown situation pretty fast, I think, compared to the other countries. So that's the main measure the government took in one front. And at the same time, in terms of managing the economy, when you lock down, it also had a bit of a not a bad bit, but like a big impact on the economy, because it completely came to like a closure over a couple of hours. So at the initial stages, there was like a lot of panic from the people's point of view, because they couldn't do their like basic essentials shopping. And then after about 5-6 days, government opened again for about 6 hours the entire country phase-wise. But then there was like a bit rush everywhere in the city areas, also in other parts of the Sri Lanka. So there was a bit of a panic there at the beginning, and then government phased it out slowly. and Colombo and Gampa has been in a complete lockdown for the last 2 to 3 weeks actually, because of the population density. So in terms of social distancing, that's one thing that government took, and at the same time, as Basanta mentioned, with the military support, government established multiple quarantine centers. So as wherever there's some other incidents being reported, that entire community or the contact tracing has been entirely quarantined. So that's one successful measure. And initially, our testing capacity was not very good. We were only able to do about 80 to 100 tests per day, which was not at all adequate. And then actually government ramped it up by getting the support from universities and other facilities to do the testing. It is not as good as like South Korea or Singapore, but I think it has improved about 5 to 6 times compared to what it was earlier. So that's a big step, and they followed basically the test, trace and treat method. So that's in terms of managing the virus spread. That are the initial steps taken. In terms of economy, the government reached out to IMF and World Bank, and President requested the World Bank and the IMF to restructure our debt payments, and requested for an extended fund facility, and we are waiting for a decision on that. At the same time, for key industries like rubber, apparel, government issued curfew passes for at least for those who are, it's possible they could start their operations, but it was difficult for them because of the other supply chains are not working. China has been closed down, and the exports has been not working. I mean, not functioning as previously. So, however, they issued curfew passes and requested the export industries mainly to operate. In terms of, those are the good things that they did. In terms of the bad side, what they could have done better, but what they missed out was they initially imposed price controls on a couple of essentials like tin fish, dal, and that completely disappeared those food items from the shelf. Basically, in basic economics, you know, when you impose a price control, there's an artificial demand, and the traders try to hide those things, and that exactly happened. And later on, government removed that price control, and they also had the price control on like face masks, and banned some other face masks manufacturers to export it, and then later on that has also been removed. In the fiscal front, government, the central bank basically printed money and like gave couple of liquid injections, and put import controls to make the because of the currency pressure, which I think is not a good move, because when you print money, of course, it when you give like liquid injection or when you create money, that badly impacts the economy. But given the stimulus package or the other relief measures that they have taken that option, and government gave like a 50 billion rupees Sri Lankan rupee moratorium for businesses, for micro and small entrepreneurs, and they suspended like the loan repayment for 2 months for office workers, and also those are the measures that the government took at this pandemic. And yeah, so that's in terms of action taken by the government.
This time I was on mute. Basanta, what's the government done in Nepal?
So the government, in the initial phase, government did the screening in the airports, and then they started creating this awareness campaign. And then later, when there were more cases in India, then we thought, okay, we will go for lockdown, and then we did a lockdown for a week, and then later we extended that lockdown for 2 more weeks, and then so now we are having lockdown up to 27th of April. So one thing is lockdown, but when government was announcing the lockdown, but they were not doing a proper homework, I believe, so that we can see in the society. So the other thing is that raising awareness campaign through different means, and then also doing the rapid testing. So now I think that it's not so good number, but still it's 943. I think we are in third position in South Asia. But I think we need to increase more to identify how many cases we have, and then the quarantine bed and all things. So the other thing is that they also insurance the frontline health workers, just like 22.5 million Nepalese rupees if something happens to those health workers. So they are going to provide that insurance to those people, and then they are government is providing relief to the poor people. I mean to say that those people who don't have food to eat. So what government is doing is that through the local government, so they are trying to collect the data, and then through the local government support, they are providing those daily necessity. I mean to say that rice, the pearls, and then the oil, or these kind of things. The other thing is that government has created a relief fund in the central level, province level, and also the local level. And also Nepal government has committed for $1 million to support the SARC region relief fund. And then recently the government come up with some measures, like that they have requested to the schools and then also to the house owner not to take 1 month rent or school fee with the school. So it's just a request. I don't think that if they can force it or not, and then is it good or not, I cannot say on that one. The other thing is that government has signed $29 million agreement with the World Bank to deal with the pandemics. And then the government also has announced that they are going to provide some sorts of internet, water, electricity subsidies, and also we can do the citizens can do the delay payments because as the situation is not so good that we cannot reach for the payments. And then the one bad thing happened to Nepal is that when we were facing this kind of this crisis, so government of Nepal, so they were dealing, they were supposed to purchase the medical kits from China. It was 2-3 weeks back, and then so government get engaged in a big corruption issue. It's a $10 million corruption issue, and then later there was a very big public criticize on the government moves, and then the government has to cancel that agreement. So I don't think that is a good move, that the government should not do this kind of things. This is the time that where they have to save the life of people, and then so they are doing these kind of activities, and people are very much angry with the government move, and then they are getting a lot of criticized. So we haven't been able to bring the stimulus package like India or America or Pakistan or other countries like Germany. So because the country is poor, our total economy is $13.71 billion economy, and then the total economy is based in either remittance or small agriculture or tourism. So so because of that reason, we are not able to bring the stimulus package. But these are the measures that government is taking. So these are the action that government is taking right now. So they're helping people in this way.
Thank you, Basanta. Parth?
Hello.
What you explained some of what government is doing in India, but what are your comments on the actions that they're taking?
So India has been quite active, and both in terms of the fiscal and monetary support to the industry and to families and individuals, as well as on the health front. So let me start with the sort of economic sort of part of the policies. So Indian government has given about 2% of GDP as a stimulus, compared to, say, for example, in the US, it's about 10% of GDP. There's a lot of pressure on the government to increase that package of support to about 5% of GDP. Right? I just read recently that maybe tomorrow the finance minister is going to announce few more support programs also. So it is, of course, going to be ongoing process in terms of what the economy needs and what the people need and how government will respond to those needs. Right? But in some ways, that has been a major sort of economic sort of package which has been given. it has several components for businesses and also for individuals. The loan payments have been sort of halted. There's a sort of moratorium on loan installment that people would have to pay. It's not yet clear whether it currently is for 3 months. Would that be extended further to 6 months? What happens to interest payment during those months? Do they have to pay all of that at the end of the 6 months or 3 months? So there are some uncertainties in terms of what the package is. But businesses are allowed not to repay their loans that they have taken from the banks and other financial institutions. Right? There's of course huge monetary stimulus package, which is largely in terms of monetizing the government deficit spending, right? Which is going to be done through the Reserve Bank of India, right? In terms of individuals, we had this what we call jam trinity. So Jan Dhan accounts, which are opened for almost every family or individual that can possibly open an account. There's a huge push for opening bank accounts, meaning giving access to the poor to the banking system in the last 5 years or so. So we have, majority of people do have a bank account. Of course, it's one thing to have an account. It's quite different thing to be able to operate the account. Quite often the bank branches are quite far away from where you are, right? So just going to a bank to withdraw money itself is a very expensive proposition for many of the poor, right? But they do have bank accounts. Many of the accounts are linked to Aadhaar, which is the India's sort of unique ID system. So you can identify individuals, and therefore you would not duplicate the support to individuals even if you have more than one bank account, right? And of course, it's also linked to your mobile number, right? So that sort of trio of sort of system allows governments to directly transfer cash into those accounts. And that is one of the major way currently government is helping people by making those cash transfers into those accounts. Right? The other big challenge is in terms of the food access to food. Right? Even though I may have money in my bank, maybe money in my hand, but very few places are open, and of course those places also running out of the supplies they have, and therefore there is a huge pressure on the food demand. What government has done is to open up the public distribution system. They're transferring more grains from the government godowns to the ration shops, and through that means they are trying to sort of provide more ration. Much of this work is done by state governments and not by the central government. So state governments are quite active in terms of providing this immediate relief that they need to provide to the citizens. For example, in Delhi, they have doubled the allocation of food ration. So what used to be common amount is now twice as much as what is given per month per family. So that's sort of one area in which government is sort of trying to help economically. On the health front, I think India has developed an antibody test, which is a quicker test that allows people to quickly test about whether you have developed antibodies to the Wuhan virus, right? And thereby you can see how many people are immune or becoming immune, or possibly could become immune to further infections. So that is one I just read about. Also, there's some other test being developed by one of the labs, which is a paper strip test. So you can do it quite easily and quickly. I have not seen how effective, accurate that test is. But yes, there is a lot of effort being made in terms of developing quicker ways to assess the infection of the Wuhan virus. I think in terms of the overall capacity of the healthcare system, maybe I can give you numbers, but overall it's not really that great. There's a effort being made in the background to increase that capacity. We don't really know what are the steps which are being taken in order to achieve that. There are many civil society, of course, organizations that have come forward to help in this area. Much of the direct help to the families and individuals is largely given by non-profit organizations, right? They are raising money. I've seen people have raised up to 75 crore 750 million rupees in few organizations and been distributing that either in terms of cash or in terms of food packets. They are buying sort of food supplies and preparing a bag of those and then giving each bag to the family. Right? So there are a lot of efforts being made by the civil society in terms of managing the urgent distress that many of the poor are facing. I think that's the overall sort of picture. In terms of other couple of policies the government has, one, we have developed an app called Arogya Setu, which is a mobile app which government is requesting everyone to download on their mobile phone, and it allows access through your location and through your Bluetooth to where, of course, you are, where you have traveled, and in some case to the Bluetooth also whom have you been in contact with. So who are the other, which are the other mobile phone around you at that point in time, right? So government has that sort of tracing mechanism in place. Recently, government claimed that it was one of the highest download in the first 13 days of the app. Something like 50 million people have downloaded the app. So that's certainly one way in which government is trying to figure out how to provide information on the mobile, as well as obviously track people through the mobile system. Last thing I will mention is that there is also registration that government has been doing for volunteers, and then using those volunteers as sort of what they call COVID warriors in local areas. And through that local coordinators, they are trying to manage local distribution of support and services. That is also other program government runs in a very large scale in terms of volunteers registered on the platform. Those are the two sort of other areas in which government is trying to see how they can deal with the current crisis.
Thanks a lot, Parth. Ali, can you tell us what Pakistan's government has been doing and what your responses to it?
Yeah, thank you. I think while I was listening to the friends from the regional countries, I was thinking that pretty much, I think the same set of steps which you will hear that Pakistan has taken. So it seems like both on the fiscal side and monetary side. So Pakistan was also was already going into the IMF program, for instance, and it requested a further debt relief program, which it has received. Also, some debt rescheduling has been approved. So a major sort of burden of the government in terms of the external payments for now has been postponed, which will give its relief to divert its resources to the health sector. One of the things which Pakistan government has been doing, and even before the crisis, it was sort of well received in international literature, was its income support program, through which it was providing direct cash to pre-selected families through a poverty scorecard. There have been problems, many problems in terms of the list of beneficiaries, but still the government is using that program. So recently Imran Khan announced cash disbursement to 1.2 million people, which can help maybe at least for 1 month or maybe 2 months. It depends on the situation of the household. So I think that is important. There is also, since the SMEs and businesses have been facing a lot of pressure because of lack of demand, the State Bank also came in and provided a relief in terms of reducing the interest rate. Just to provide a perspective, Pakistan, the interest rate had recently gone up to about 14 to 15%. So quite high. Pakistan actually was following a strategy where to attract the so-called hot money into its financial system, but that has not been working largely for the businesses. It is only for the financial sector, and provide some cushion. So that has gone. I think that the government, this maybe the crisis has forced the government to rethink some of these measures. So it brought down that interest rate, and also introduced some moratorium on the repayment of the loans. We also see, I think most of you are aware that the military in Pakistan plays a very important role in governance and in politics, has been there historically. What was good to see that this crisis has maybe provided an opportunity, both civil and military leadership to come together. So they have established a national control and command center, NCOC Operations Center, headed by a federal minister, in which the provincial ministers and other health experts are providing their inputs. So we see efforts on the part of the government in terms of coordinating response. But I think Pakistan did face the problem where, as I said earlier, the Prime Minister and the provincial chief ministers were not seen to be on one page, at least in the beginning. And that created problems in terms of communication, in terms of strategy, but that seems to have subsided, and coordination at the national level has improved. Also, more recently, the government announced a special package for the construction industry, because this is one industry which the government said they are going to open up. So bringing some kind of tax incentives, other support measures, even introducing new rules, relaxing regulations for the construction industry to boom. So maybe this, if it is properly implemented, then maybe some of these business-friendly rules can be used for further economic activity, and can provide some examples of better policy making in the future. Also happy to see that although the price controls are generally there, but supply situation, at least in this time period, has been relatively stable. If the situation gets worsened, so I cannot say, because each day situation is changing. So I think on that part, the problem has not yet emerged. Just to give you another example, I don't know about other countries in the region, but I'll be happy, interested to know, for instance, there was a lot of demand from Pakistan, Pakistani engineers and IT experts to allow the import of 3D printers, because 3D printers can be used to, for instance, in development of prototypes and development of PPEs, the protective equipment, designs of ventilator beds, etc. But unfortunately, government of Pakistan had imposed restrictions on the import of the 3D printers owing to security concerns. That has not yet been lifted, but I have heard that the government is considering to lift the ban on the 3D printers. So I think this crisis has put reasonable pressure also on the government policy making bodies and individuals to actually come up with these measures, and hopefully some of them may actually be implemented.
Thank you so much, Ali. So I wanted to keep some time for questions from the audience as well, and it's already 4:50. So if you could quickly go around and discuss two things. One is the actions of civil society in markets to help ease the issues caused by the pandemic. And second, how do you see the future of your country after this pandemic is over? Whoever would like to start? Parth? You're the first face I see, so.
So in terms of what the civil society is doing, I already mentioned that much of the direct help that people and families are getting today is given by civil society organizations. One sort of complaint that I have is that Prime Minister has created a separate fund called PM Cares. And I think some of you probably know that we have a law that requires private companies to contribute about a percentage and 2% of their net profit to CSR activities. Right? That law has been in place for the last few years, and the government has created this fund in which many of the companies are now under, in some sense, you can say, under pressure to contribute to that fund. And so much of the money from private sector, at least from larger corporate sector, is now moving into the PM Cares Fund, right? And that, in a sense, is taking away resources from civil society, right? And there's some debate around that in terms of why government, of course, has the means of its own to do what it needs to do. It should allow civil society to also create those other extra resources and be able to help, because I think in a diverse country, in a large country like India, there is no state machinery that can deliver benefit in the last mile, right? So last mile connectivity is always going to be by local organizations. And if they have the resources, then they will be able to meet the local challenges far better, right? They also have understanding of local needs, right? There are different, even though, yes, everybody needs food, but it's not just one kind of food, right? There are different types of diets people have, different preferences people have. So you can customize many of those things if you allow local organizations and communities to sort of have resources to take care of themselves, right? So there's one debate around this particular government fund that has been created, which is taking quite a substantial sums of money from the corporate and private sector. So that's the one large chunk of the work the people are doing. I think second, also the for-profit companies, the corporate sector is also has chipped in. Mahindra and many other companies have sort of retooled their factories to produce equipment which is required for dealing with the current crisis. There are many households which are making face masks. Actually, the face masks that I have been, at least my family has been using, that are homemade. And I see when I do go out for a little bit of walk or a quick stop to a nearby shop, I do see most people are wearing those handmade face masks. So that certainly has been a contribution from the civil society in terms of what they can do. I think so. One big chunk of the work is that in terms of what I see for the future, I think I agree with Ali Salman. I hope that is really true. The governments are under pressure to deregulate, to sort of, for example, telemedicine, right? There are a lot of restrictions on what can be done through telemedicine. Now, of course, there's a lot of pressure, including from the Association of Psychologists, to allow therapy to be done through telemedicine, and also prescription drug to be delivered through online, in a sense, right? So there's a pressure on government to sort of deregulate, allow more freedom, more autonomy to various sort of agents within the healthcare system, right? Also in terms of approval of drugs and tests, the test I just mentioned earlier about antibody test that's been developed in India, approved in record time, as you can imagine, right? So that also, I think, sets a new precedent in terms of how quickly the work can be done by the bureaucracy. And hopefully that remains the case as we move out of the crisis. So there's some silver lining in terms of what could change in terms of government regulatory structure. At the same time, obviously, there is a fear of surveillance state, right? The app I mentioned, Arogya Setu, is going to be collecting data on you. Today, obviously, people are willing to download the app and allow their access to the government. Since it is a crisis situation, the people know they need to be part of the solution, right? But they don't know what will be done with this data, how the app will be continued to be used after the crisis is over, right? So there's a fear that a lot of privacy that we are giving away today for the crisis may never come back to us, and therefore the government powers to oversight citizens could be far, far higher after the crisis.
Thank you, Parth. Dhananath, very nice new background, I must say.
Yeah, it's the same Dhananath. Since the lighting was not very good
Yeah.
inside, I thought this would
This is
be
wonderful.
give like a better, yes.
So,
So yeah, in terms of how would be the new normal after COVID, I think what I sense is it's pretty much the South Asian region is pretty much it's moving in the same direction. In Sri Lanka, in terms of civil society contribution, I mean, there are charity organizations who did their part. Corporate organizations, they spend their CSR budgets on donating personal protective equipments and so on. But in terms of civil society, I think they have been contributing, but I think they also in bit of a still like in a wait and mode, wait and see mode is what I feel, because it's a new situation here. And in Sri Lanka, how actually the government managed was they used like they utilized the military power on operating quarantine centers, and even the military intelligence has been used to trace some of the contacts. So the military has been doing a significant amount of work, and even to like some of the commercial activities like distributing food, essential services, some of the healthcare facilities that has been managed by the military. So that is one challenge. And in terms of the support from the corporate sector, I think the hotels, a few hotel owners, they donated their hotels and their premises as quarantine centers for a temporary period. So that has been commended. So what I feel is at the same time, in terms of a challenge, I think there's also a lot of power centralized towards the government, and people's expectation from the government has drastically gone up, and people seems to be drifting towards more dependent towards government in here. And to an extent, I think government has also, in our case, done a reasonable job, which also brings expectations high for the people. But the downside is, of course, as we know, when you try to depend too much on the government, that also highly we are limiting the space for individual liberty and private enterprises. And what we see is exactly that is in Sri Lanka, because now even like the vegetable distribution has been to an extent taken by the military. So as the government mechanism has been pretty much to a great extent being used, even to the functions that could have been easily done by the private sector. So that is something that we have to be somewhat caution. On the other end, but government also had to adhere, like lifting the price controls, which is pretty much not the case in a normal situation, because that add pressure on them as well. And the crisis situation was a good example how the bad economics also works, and the bad consequences of implementing bad economics. So that has been the update. I think the new normal would be, what I feel is, also there is like this distant working, distant learning, and working online functions will develop. And Sri Lanka is also expecting to have an election towards end May or early June. So I think it's a mixed bag of results. People's expectations have gone up. At the same time, government has to follow the basic economics and let the market works. But it's overlapping in multiple cases. And I feel in terms of civil society And like the freedom leaders, it will be a challenging time, especially on convincing people on the importance of having free enterprises and free trade. Of course, because of the pressure on the currency, because of the lack of dollar reserves in the central banks. So that would be somewhat challenging, is what I feel.
Thank you, Naranath. Ali, how is it in Pakistan? What is the future that you look for? You're on mute.
Yeah, I think, look, I'll give you one example of the kind of policies and the follies which the government had been doing, and hopefully this crisis gave them enough shock. This crisis, this is, as economists are saying, this is a demand shock, but it's also become a supply shock. But there should be a policy shock also. And to give you one related example from the healthcare sector, for instance, in the pharma sector. So government of Pakistan had been following a price freeze policy from year 2000 to year 2013. So for 13 years, government did not allow any prices in the medicine to be risen. And unsurprisingly, that led to most of the multinationals winding up their operations from Pakistan. That created space for local industry. So there are about 700 like firms which are operating in this sector in Pakistan. But that created already a huge crisis in terms of shortage of essential medicine. The prices of the medicines, the highly efficacy medicine have gone up. The access has become a problem. In Pakistan, there are about 70,000 registered drugs and only 10,000 are being produced. The incentive has gone, and the multinationals which are actually in the medicine business are just producing some cosmetics. So, and I know that this crisis is not directly relevant with the pharmaceutical as such, but it is related. So what I hope that this has given them enough shock to come out of these self-induced harms and policy which is actually doing no good for the people at large. And I also hope that the importance of a good local government is realized. Pakistan is, as I said, a federal country, so there are provincial governments and local governments, but they're relatively weak. And although Pakistan has made substantial progress in terms of devolution, but a lot of capacity needs to be built at local level. So some of these problems can be solved if there are strong local governments, and not everything has to be solved by a central government, such as setting up a quarantine center. It could be managed locally. So I hope that Pakistani government and other stakeholders also learn this lesson and establish and undertake these reforms. We've also seen that while the state is weak, we also see that civil society has been always active. I think that, like other examples shared, philanthropy has been on the rise. And this is, as you know, this is the month of fasting around coming in a few days' time. So generally, Muslims, culturally speaking, tend to become much more generous and giving culture. So this should help, I think, but there should also be a call. There should be a need of maybe a better organization of this even civil society led philanthropy, and similarly also call for businesses to be maybe better organized. using technology is important, and dependence on, let's say, manual method all the time also poses risks. So hopefully this crisis also given them a wake-up call to how to maintain under the crisis. So I think it's a strong wake-up call for not just the government, but also the civil society organizations, private sector, even think tanks, and we are all learning our lessons, I think.
Thank you, Ali. So Basanta, what is the situation in Nepal going to be after the crisis is done?
Okay, before that, so I'll just point on the citizen role in
Sure.
so in this crisis. So the private individuals and organizations, so they are helping poor people to feed, so to provide the relief, food packages. That is one good thing that people are doing. So it's a lockdown situation, so many people cannot come out from the homes, and then people cannot do much more things. But still, there are people who are feeding the animals, so who cannot have a food during this situation. So there are people who are feeding the animals. They are contributing to the government. So private individuals are contributing to the government relief fund, and also there are young people who are contributing to the community police. So they are helping the community police to make this lockdown successful. So these are the things that people are doing, and also people are being active in social media. We have a strong civil society movement. I say that, and the people are when the government was involved in corruption issues like medicine supply. So people opposed that government move, and the government had to give up that. And also there are many people suffering in the road. So many people could not go to the home, like some really organizations. So they are initiating the campaign like let people go home. So there are civil society organizations who are doing, their private organizations, they are doing from their side, but there is nothing they can do much from their home. So these are the things they are doing. And then so the future of the country is one thing is sure that we are not sure that how long this pandemic is going to last. So that is the problem. We only can speculate. One thing is sure that it's going to make our economy weak, and that is going to make us poor. And then now there is a choice with the government. So either you can keep people poor, make people more poor, and then you suppress them. Either you create or deregulate and make doing business environment easy, and let people create the job. So if you see Nepal ranked 94th position in doing business index, so we are not in a good position now. It's a time because we have to rebound, we have to bounce ourselves. So that's why it's a prime time to deregulate all these hurdles and let people do the business or create the employment. I'm just worried if when people will come back from the foreign countries, and then I don't know what government is going to do. And so I think that if government can deregulate, they can create more jobs. So or people can create more jobs. The other thing is, I believe that so there will be a kind of people will be saying that we need more government, or government should do more, because I can see that there are some people who are saying that government should nationalize these private hospitals. So because these private hospitals could not provide the services because they don't know who is infected or not, and they don't have enough capacity. So that's why now people are saying that, okay, what is the use of private hospitals? So it should be nationalized. So these are the discourse that's going on. So people are raising their voice that we have to be self-sufficient, and people are creating a nationalist kind of voice, or they think that so we need a protectionist policies instead of free trade, and these are things also going on. So for me, I think that it's a prime time that government should move. So I cannot make sure that I can say that what is going to happen in coming days, but this is what I expect.
Thank you so much, Basanta. Let's go to the questions. I'm going to take the questions that have been asked for all the panelists first, and then perhaps go to questions for specific panelists. So the first question for all the panelists is, what role has the media played amongst the ongoing pandemic? And has there been any restrictions placed on them to follow the government narrative? Whoever wants to start.
I will go first on that, Azad.
Please.
So in Sri Lanka, the media has been to an extent criticized for being too much in favor of government, and for following poor code of conduct on media in reporting, because some of them highlighted, when they are reporting the cases, they highlighted their ethnicity, their religion. For an example, the 6 COVID patients, and 3 of them are, for an example, Muslim or Christians. Likewise, so that has been heavily criticized, and sometimes the gender and all that. And what we saw was, even when the contact tracing was happened, some of the media, they went with camera, so it actually camera for their respective residences. So actually the people's privacy has been badly neglected. So pretty much it was neglect or criticized on social media, the role of media. But that's the privacy side and their reporting side. But as collectively, they I think, as many other countries in the world, they in terms of informing people, in terms of creating the awareness, they did a wonderful job. But I think in terms of reporting it, I think there are a lot of areas for improvement for Sri Lankan media, and that is what I see. Just to add to what Basanta's recommendation on ease of doing businesses, since it has a lot of connectivity for Sri Lanka, that is the same recommendation as Advocata, what we also recommended the government, because anyway our balance sheets were very poor and we needed investments, we needed a lot of foreign cash. So what we said was, make this an opportunity to go for big reforms while we are focusing on fighting this battle. Deregulate the tough regulations, because these people would like to take a hit at this point. And also, if you following the geopolitics, there's a bit of a conversation from Japan that they are going to move out from China, and some of the corporations trying to relocate their factories out of China. It's just a conversation, but I think countries like Sri Lanka and Nepal has to be prepared by having easier regulatory regimes for these big corporations to move in, and be prepared for that. For Sri Lanka, it would be difficult, I'm sure, so as for Pakistan, because China and Sri Lanka and Pakistan has like a lot of strong connections. There'll be a lot of geopolitics, but I think at an overall level, those are the things that the government can take an advantage and move for more liberty, more freedom, more free enterprise, more free trade is also in the horizon if government and the policymakers take this as an advantage.
Thanks, Dhananath.
I think just following up on Dhananath from Sri Lanka, I think media has similar, role that it has played in terms of highlighting. As you know, there's a long history of Hindu-Muslim sort of tension in India. It turned out that Tablighi Jamaat, which is one of the sects, Muslim sects, had a large gathering in New Delhi. And after the gathering sort of dispersed, large number of cases that came a few days after that came from those individuals who had come to Delhi and then had gone back to the places that they came from. And therefore, media had overplayed that sort of card and created quite a bit of sort of further, in a sense, divergence between the Hindus and Muslims in playing up that card. Right? So that certainly has been a very bad sort of part of the media's role in terms of highlighting religious dimension and the differences as a way to sort of then condemn one community over the other. I think in terms of restrictions, the government has put some restrictions in terms of what can be reported. There's a pressure on the media to report government data and not to sort of do too much of self-reporting of the data from the ground, right? So you can see stories which are media is covering individual stories, but not so much in terms of the overall data of what's going on within a state or in the country as a whole. For all of those, media is largely relying on the government data. So quite often people say that media is now become a sort of a PR arm of the health ministry, which issues these bulletins every evening, update on what has happened in the country on that day. Right? But I think otherwise, I think the online media has done a very good job of gathering information internationally and presenting that in the various different forms. Think tanks also have done a good job in terms of informing the public in what's going on outside India and what lessons we can learn from that.
Thank you, Parth.
If I may just briefly comment, I think in Pakistan actually historically has enjoyed in last few years like intense media freedom, intense media competition, sorry. And that also has led to like, maybe 70 or 80 news channels which are privately owned. There have been, I think, like a lot of concerns about the sort of exaggerated or exaggeration which has been portrayed by the media in terms of the intensity of the crisis for Pakistan. Most of them do not have their own sort of research capacity. So that in terms of numbers, they are following the official numbers. But in terms of the tone, in terms of the expressions, in terms of the giving a message to the public about the severity of the crisis, one feels that they could be moderated and also help in maybe projecting the other aspects like economic aspects of the crisis. So there is a need, I think, of there is a scope of media becoming more responsible and use the freedom which it has to actually come up with more balanced views. I think it's not much of a control by the government at this point in time, which is the issue. It's more on the self-responsibility of the media, which is the need of the hour in case of Pakistan.
Thanks, Ali. Basanta?
Thank you very much, Yazad. So I'd say that media has played a very good role, I say, especially online media. And then media is somehow free in this country, in our part of the world. So sometimes government wants to restrict the media. They want to censor media, but still we can criticize, our media can criticize the government move. And then definitely I say that in this situation media is doing really a good job. So they are criticizing government bad moves, and then there are some cheerleader media. They are always going to promote those kind of views, the one-sided views. And then also we can see some fake news type of things, and in our part of the world it's going to be a problem where people are illiterate, or when so if many people are illiterate, and then if they cannot distinguish which news is fake and which is the real, and then that can create a big problem. So I can see that many people sharing those kind of news, and then people are appreciating those kind of things. So that is somehow problem. And sometimes I can see that the communal voice, as we are highly influenced by Indian media, because we can access to Indian media because of that reason. So as the 31 infected people, so if you see that half of those people, I say that the people, as Parth mentioned, that 31 people are who are infected, though they came back from the Taqlibi Jamaat. So they're Indian citizens. So yesterday we found 12 people. They were from India. They were we found them in a mosque in Udaipur, and then 3 people in Bilganj side of border. So these 15 people, so out of the 31 cases, so these people are Indian. And then now people have started saying that, okay, so look at these people, Muslim people, they are hiding in the mosque, and then they are spreading virus. We can see this kind of communal kind of thing, but still our society is not so communal, I say. But sometimes when we are influenced by the neighboring country media, and that can create a big problem. But I say that so far media is very much neutral, and then they are doing a good job.
Thank you so much, Basanta.
Can I comment, yes, something on that?
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah, and slightly on the lighter note, I think also Parth mentioned about the, of course, the Hindu-Muslim tension in India and other. It is well known, but I would say that within Pakistan, when one like vast majority of population is Muslim, there's already a sentiment against some Muslims who are refusing, unfortunately, to follow public health guidelines and to follow. So there's a lot of, I think recently has been pointed out in Pakistan case that many Muslims, especially the religious leaders, are unfortunately not following the state authority, they're not following public health advice and some of these matters. And so that is still a crisis which Pakistan is facing, and it has not come to a resolution yet.
Yep, thank you. So China plays a pretty big role in this region, and more so in some countries. So how will the current pandemic shift your government's policy response towards China? Will it seek to be more assertive towards China now? This is originally for Sri Lanka and Pakistan, but I'm opening up to all the panelists.
In terms of Sri Lankan response, again, it was at the beginning somewhat criticized the government action because when they closed down the airport, before that there was a series of quarantining for all the passengers arriving from abroad. So first the restrictions was for Italy, South Korea, and for the European countries, but China was never included in the list. So there were questions why Chinese passengers were not included in the list, and then the reason given was the risk is going down in China, and there is no reason to have Chinese passengers on quarantine. However, according to the reports, there were no Chinese passengers also reported thereafter in media, and according to government reports, none of the Chinese passengers were also reported having infected COVID-19. In terms of Chinese support, yes, Sri Lanka getting a lot of Chinese support. They extended an $800 million loan, bilateral loan, and I think they are going to extend it for about 1.6 billion to 2 billion loan because we have a massive debt repayment this year, and for the upcoming 3 years we have about $16 billion to be repaid for the sovereign bonds that we have taken, and we only have about 7 billion in our reserves. With this COVID pandemic, it will be very difficult for us to pay that unless we get like a bilateral support from China or from India or some of the neighboring countries. But given the situation, we understand India and the rest of the neighboring countries are also in a similar trouble. So it is definitely the Chinese support that we expect. And even the IMF, we are already in an IMF program, and we haven't performed exceptionally well in the IMF facility. So however, IMF is considering to support us, but it is pretty much we have to depend on China. So that is what is the situation from Sri Lanka. I feel Chinese role will be critical for Sri Lanka to face this situation on a couple of fronts, not only on bailing us out, but also in terms of a lot of supply chains for apparel sector and other sectors. It's China dependent. So in a supply chain point of view, on a fiscal management and a broader balance sheet perspective, and also in construction and already the projects which are conducting with China, I think they will be critical in facing this pandemic.
Thank you, Dhana. Ali?
So yeah, exactly. Thank you. I think Pakistan and China have enjoyed historical economic ties, and especially recent years, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, $60 billion plus investment from China into Pakistan in infrastructure projects and other projects have been well documented now. Before the crisis, sort of first phase of that investment had already completed in terms of the physical investment in the energy sector and in the infrastructure sector. So that was done before the crisis already. There was a major development just a few weeks before the crisis hit, that Pakistan and China entered into the second phase of free trade agreement, which they signed initially in 2004, but then there was a phase 2. So there was an expectation of an increased trade and especially increased exports from Pakistan to China. But now everything had suddenly become to a halt. But I think there are like what we saw recently in this crisis was a very close collaboration and coordination between the leadership of the two countries. In the early days of Wuhan crisis, there were like scores of Pakistani students who were in Wuhan. And there was a lot of demand, of course, from Pakistani parents and society on the government of Pakistan to bring back, repatriate those Pakistani citizens from China. But the government actually did not. And I think it was a wise call. The Chinese government also ensured best possible measures. So they were not repatriated, but that actually helped Pakistan in possible early breakout. And also we saw recently a delegation from China coming to Pakistan, comprising of experts, doctors, who provided some technical support and stayed in Pakistan for a few weeks. So I think it's that cooperation might have deepened in the crisis.
Thank you, Ali. Parth, Basanta, would you also like to comment on this?
I would say China has a lot to answer for. And I think once the crisis is over, I suspect that the international community is going to look at China somewhat differently than it has been so far. Obviously, it began in Wuhan. We still don't know the full story of what actually happened, how many people have died. Even those numbers are in dispute. The early warnings. I think my one big fear is that role China played in undermining WHO. WHO had a great reputation until that point in dealing with this kind of international situation. But somehow China had a strong influence on them. And we know the things the WHO had said, including that the virus does not transfer from human to human, right? And so those kind of, I think, pressure China has exercised. I think international community is going to be looking at Chinese dominance, increasing dominance in the international arena.
Thank you. I think Basanta's video has frozen. Basanta, can you hear us? Ah, he's back. Hello? Yeah.
Yeah. Did I miss something?
No. I just wanted to ask you what the role of China and Nepal, and will Nepal kind of be more assertive towards China after the crisis is over?
I think that so if we see historically that we have got more ties with India, so we have got more business with India, so we had more trade with India than with China. But I think that nowadays, so it's our business is increasing with China also. So as the whole world is doing business with China, so also our supply depends on China also. And then we have got this communist government, but it's not like China. It's not like authoritarian government. We have got this democratic communist government, I say that, which has got 2/3 majority. And definitely, so being a communist country, so they may have got some sorts of sympathy to each other. So and it's always a kind of a dilemma to Nepal. So either which side should we shift, either to the Indian side or to the Chinese side, and then both are the big brothers to us. So that's why it's always going to be a dilemma to us. And the other thing is that the people have got nowadays, that I can see that people have got more sympathy towards China, instead of India, because maybe because of the economic blockade 3 years back, that people have a negative, general people have got a negative concept about Indian government, and then people appreciate the Chinese government, and they say that we need this kind of leadership, we need so Chinese model, or we need some kind of authoritarian government to rule the people. There are people who we can hear this kind of discourses from the people, and then even in this pandemic situation. So the way China is projecting themselves that they have solved all the problems, and now they are ready to help others. So people believe that, okay, China is the model that we can follow, and then we can rely on, and we need those kind of the government, or we need those kind of leadership. So that is what general people have for the concept.
Thank you so much, Basanta. We're nearly out of time, but we can squeeze in one question. Hello. Yeah, I said we're nearly out of time, but we can squeeze in one question where, if you can very briefly say, if there's a message you want to send to your government and the people of your country, what would that message be?
Well, I would say that encourage, empower individuals and local communities to address their problems, provide them the resources, and not direct from the top, right? Second, I think increase global cooperation. I think we need to work with each other. It's a global crisis. I know there's a tremendous pressure on the countries to isolate themselves, but that will be, I think, doing a great disservice to ourselves as individuals as well as humanity. So I think I would urge the Indian government looks out for other countries and do a partnership in a way that we can all work together to solve this problem.
Thanks, Parth. Ali?
Yeah, I think this is I highlighted. So there may be two messages. So one is that we certainly need to trust different parts of society in mitigating this crisis. And that comprises the government, but that also comprises the market forces as well as civil society. But also, I think within Pakistani context, we also need to ensure, to see actually more, I would say, proactive leadership in terms of messaging, in terms of the communication, in terms of bringing on all parts of the segment of the population on one page, because this is a global crisis, and within each country, of course, this is also a national crisis. So if one segment of the population is feeling or reacting to this crisis in a different manner, that does not help them and does not help anyone else. So bringing a national response while bringing everyone together is important.
Thank you.
From my end, I would follow the similar recommendation that Prath suggested. It's important that we go for like a global cooperation, and I think this is a good reason why we should realize how important is the global cooperation, and we work with each other together, because individually we can't sustain. And that has been proven in COVID-19, because in terms of having testing capacity to bringing food, and our entire life cycle is dependent on each other, and we have to admit that. And just because of the pandemic, we should not think reverse. We should not think, okay, now because of without the global support that we can't sustain ourselves, and now we should go and isolate. What we need to understand is we are dependent pretty much on everyone, so we have to strengthen the links, the bonding more than what we had before. And that is the reality, because as we already know, in isolation the life is so difficult, and the quality of life is so bad, right? So it is very important that we embrace the global cooperation and work with each other. That's number one. Number two is there have been in the South Asian region, specifically to Sri Lanka, there has been big reforms towards free trade, which has been delaying because of the lack of political capital. I think this is a good opportunity to get those big reforms done, because now people are anyway in a mode to fasten their seat belts. So even if there are some negatives, people will be willing to take that hit or bite that bullet. So this is a time that we need to go for like big reforms. As Basanta said, something that is in terms of ease of doing businesses, deregulation, in terms of bringing our fiscal management back on track. This is a this is a good time, and it is proven now. Now, for an instance, Sri Lanka, we have a big government workforce, and of course they can't work from home because they are not working on computers throughout. So now we really face the mistakes that we have done in the past, especially in a crisis like this. So make sure we go for big reforms and make our balance sheet and the fiscal management back on track, is the other message. And my final message would be not politicize the situation. And I see some ethnic religious tensions are slightly coming up. I think we should not play politics and increase the tensions between communities and religious groups, or those or small things should be completely forgotten, and we should work as like a human race. And again, this pandemic has proven your religion or your caste creed or your race doesn't matter. When it comes to a crisis or a pandemic, it impacts everyone regardless of which god that you believe in. So that is my final message, that we should not play politics and play that religious ethnicity card at this global pandemic. And this is serious. We have to rise up together, and I'm sure if we get together as a human race, we can overcome this.
Thank you so much, Dhananath. Basanta?
So I second to my friends, and so as the Nepal government, the current Nepal government slogan is "Happy Nepali and Prosperous Nepal." So I think that we need more economic freedom now than any other time. So the government should think about this, and also every citizen should raise voice for this. The second thing is that so we have got this South Asian region has got this SAFTA, South Asian Free Trade Association. So now it's time to revive that SAFTA. We created that SAFTA in 2004, and then we were supposed to end all kind of tariffs, bring zero tariffs till 2020, but we haven't done anything on that one. So I think that now it's prime time to implement the SAFTA and then create a free trade zone. So this is my message, final message.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a great pleasure to have all four of you on the panel. I'd also like to thank all our viewers who've been watching us, and remind you all that there are two upcoming panels at 7:30. One is on the future of liberty, and the other one is on fiscal and monetary policy in wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much, and stay safe.